Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz Color Kitz Collection. So for this layout, I'm using some triangles that I made for the first layout of the month because I had so many left over and I had a couple of ideas of how I could use them for another layout. And I made these triangles on my previous October video for Shimmerz Paints. I'll put the link to that video in the description box if you're interested in watching. But I took a square die and then some of the pattern papers from the kit and some white cardstock, and I have a couple of layers of white cardstock, and then I attached the square pattern paper on top. And then once I had layered the squares, I cut them down the center and made triangles. And I had a question in the last video about how big the squares were. They measured 2 inches. Initially, my idea was to have a strip of triangles going down the center of my page. And then I would take the photo and I would put it right in the middle. And so when I was arranging the triangles, I wasn't too worried about which patterns I had in the center because I knew they were going to get covered up. However, my plan for this layout changed quite a bit as I went along. So you might see some triangles magically moving from place to place because I did move them around quite a bit. I also didn't end up using this photo for this layout, and I didn't end up putting my photos in the center. So a lot of changes, but you'll see that evolve as the process goes on. So I took a piece of heavy white cardstock, I put a whole bunch of ATG adhesive on it, and then I transferred all of those triangles from my mat to the piece of cardstock. And then this way I would have one piece of paper that I could move around without having to keep manipulating those triangles. And then I knew I was going to have a mixed media background, so it's just so much easier to have the elements arranged in a way that I could move them around and not have to worry about adding mixed media around my pattern paper. And I really like the way these 3 different pattern papers look together. I like the way there's the one that's mainly orange, there's the bat paper that's mainly purple, and then there's the candy corn paper that has the black background, and then a few little pops of yellow and orange. Those 3 colors together really have a fantastic Halloween flavor to them. I'm cutting off the little bit of paper that's left over at the top. Next, I take distress ink in black soot and I ink the edge of the outside of that large rectangle, and this is the same ink that I use to ink each of the individual triangles. So some time passed, and when I came back to the layout, I was thinking that that rectangle looked a little uninteresting. I thought maybe I could give it a little bit more character by making it into a different shape. So I was thinking that if I cut away some of the triangles, I could make a zigzag out of it, and that's what I ended up doing. So I cut away every other triangle on one side of the rectangle, and then I flipped it over, and then I cut away every other rectangle on the other side. And I hope that this makes sense, but the rectangles that I cut away on the bottom were in the opposite place from the rectangles that I cut away on the top, and that's what made that kind of a zigzag shape to this piece of paper. And I knew right away that I liked this configuration of the triangles a little bit better. I think that it wasn't as much of a big, huge block on my layout. It was a little bit more decorative. Before continuing, I switched a couple of those triangles around, and now I'm getting ready to create a mixed media background. Well, I'm using a piece of 120-pound smooth white cardstock that I have covered with some Liquitex gesso. That's my standard mixed media paper. And I use a pencil to mark off approximately where that large element is going to be on the background so I know where to put the paint. And then I started off my mixed media background with a Shimmerz, and the name of the color is Celery. And I love this color green. I think that it goes so well with the pattern papers in the collection. It's just nice and vibrant and bright. So I am using the packaging technique, which I usually use, and I'm adding my first layer of celery to the background. And then I go back in after drying it with my heat tool and I add another layer, and this makes the color a little bit darker and a little bit more intense. And I chose to start off with green because I knew that the green would contrast with the purple, orange, and black that I have in the zigzag. And I wanted to mention that when you use your heat tool on a mixed media background, the heat tool does tend to make the paper warp a little bit. So what I do is I run my mixed media background through a laminator before I add anything other than paints to the background. I make sure that it's completely dry, and then I put it into one of the pockets and I just run it through a couple of times just to try to flatten the mixed media paper out, and I think that it works really well. I got that tip from a Paige Evans video many, many years ago. And for me, it was really worth it to invest in a laminator because I make so many mixed media backgrounds. But you could also just allow the background to air dry, and that way the paper doesn't get nearly as warped as it does with that heat tool. It's very handy, but then it does cause a lot of warping. So now I'm adding another color to the background. This is a Creameez called Dandelion. And I like this combination of the green with the yellow. And Dandelion is not a light yellow color. It's more kind of even bordering slightly on being an orangey yellow color. But I think that it's a great combination to go along with the green that's on the background already. I added a lot of splatters to this background, and I always add splatters to my mixed media pages. I just think that the splatters add a nice element, but I think that for certain subjects, more splatters are more appropriate, and I think for a Halloween layout, it's fine if the background is even a little bit more messy looking than usual. So I added lots and lots of splatters. I started off with the dandelion, and then I went back in with the celery, and I am mainly adding them along the border of where I have the mixed media, and that way there'll be a little bit of splattering along that edge of the larger area of color. But as long as the color is dry, you can see the splatters even when you add them to the large area of color. So I try to get the splatters pretty much everywhere on the mixed media. I guess I forgot to re-ink the edges of this large element on my page once I cut those triangles out of it. So now I'm going back in and I'm inking the edges of the zigzag. And then I was thinking that I wanted to bring a little bit of black into the background. So I'm going to do some stamping. I have a couple of stamps that I use all the time. I have this text stamp. This is a rubber stamp. I'm not sure what the manufacturer is on this stamp, but I use it a lot. And I put a piece of fun foam on the back of it just to make it a little bit easier to grip onto and handle. And then I also use this dot stamp. This is another stamp that I use on a regular basis. And I have a little folder with all of the stamps that I use the most often so that when I go to make a background, I don't have to dig through all of my texture stamps. I have the ones that I will probably use. And of course, this is great because I have my stamps ready, but sometimes it makes me neglect some of the other stamps. So I try to rotate the stamps and add and take away from this little kit as time goes by. And this little crackle stamp is a new addition. I got that at a secondhand craft store that I go to, and I just love the way that it looks, and I think it goes really well with that Halloween feel. Now I'm adding some more splatters. I decided to add this bright color. It's a Vibez called Jack-o'-lantern, and I really like the addition of the orange. It's just such a bright, vibrant color. And then I was thinking that I needed some black splatters on the background. I love stamping, but there's nothing like the randomness of splattering on the background. So I'm using some Color Splash in Black Hole, and I'm splattering my black splatters. Not too liberally, just trying to add a couple of them to each of the areas of the background. Although it kind of looks like I'm adding a lot of splatters, but these splatters are very tiny. So I had changed my mind about the photo. I decided that instead of using that one large photo in the center, that I would use these two smaller photos. I have both of them mounted on some white cardstock, and I'm mounting them again on some black cardstock. And that will help to emphasize them a little bit, make them stand out from the background. So these are photos of my daughter, Julia. She was experimenting with some face paint. I think that she did a really great job. Both of my children and my husband really like scary movies. Although I love Halloween and a lot of the things that go along with Halloween, I'm not a big fan of scary movies. They're definitely not my favorite, but they all love them. So I could see how that kind of influenced her face paint here. So I was thinking that I wanted to add more mixed media. It looks a little funky right now, but what I'm doing is I'm going to add some more paint going around the border of the two photos. It just looked a little plain to me without that, so I don't include the footage because I did the exact same thing that I did on the rest of the layout, but I expanded the area of mixed media in the exact same way, and this way there's a lot more paint on the background. I'm going to add some modeling paste to the background. I'm using a stencil from the Crafter's Workshop called Scary Web Stencil. This is a 12 by 12 inch version, and I was wondering if there's a 6 by 6 inch stencil that's just like this. I think I would get a lot of use out of that too, but I like this large scale spider web for this particular layout. So I am just spreading that modeling paste through the majority of the stencil, and I think that this adds a nice little touch, a Halloween touch to the mixed media. And I was looking through my Halloween stencils. I love Halloween, so I have a number of stencils, and I realized that I have a number of spiderweb stencils, but none of them have these nice thin lines like this one does. So like I said, I'm going to be on the lookout for a smaller version of this stencil. So I wanted to mount the whole layout on some black cardstock, so I added lots of ATG adhesive to the back of my mixed media, and I trimmed the edge just a little bit just so that there would be a black border all around the outside. I think that that black border kind of contains the whole layout. It frames it. There's just something about it that I like the way it looks when there's a border. And now I'm finally ready to attach down that zigzag to my layout. So I had lots and lots of ATG adhesive so that it'll stick to all of those sprays and modeling paste. I'm also using my T-square to make sure that it's straight, because there have been several times where I put a major element like this on one of my layouts and it was crooked and it was very hard to fix once I had added the photo and embellishments to it. And sometimes I couldn't fix it at all. So I try to be really careful about just taking a second and checking to make sure that everything is straight. Here I'm adding a little bit of fun foam behind the top of the top photo and the bottom of the bottom photo, because they're resting on that zigzag, which is a little bit elevated off the page, with a little bit of dimension to it. So I wanted the photos to sit flat, so the fun foam did the trick. Now I'm using some of the elements from the kit to embellish my layout, and I start off with this moon, and I wanted the moon to show up a little bit more. I know I'm going to be placing it against the white area of the background, and I was afraid it wouldn't show up enough, so I'm fussy cutting out a black border for it by attaching it down to some black cardstock and then just cutting around as carefully as I could. It's certainly not perfect, but I think that it was worth adding this little border just because otherwise I think it would have gotten lost. So I love adding moons to Halloween layouts, so I knew I was going to use this embellishment. And then there was a pattern paper that had bats on it, so I fussy cut out 2 of the bats, and I think that they go really well near the moon. And I also chose a few other embellishments. I have a title to the right-hand side of my layout that says Happy Halloween. I also wanted to incorporate a witch's hat. I end up moving that hat, but I do keep it on the layout. And I usually like to add embellishments in larger clusters, but on this layout, I kind of sprinkled them around a little bit. So I have my moon with the bats, that's a cluster, and then I have the tombstone, the witch's cauldron, and the eyeball all the way off to the left. Then there's another cluster with the casket, the jack-o'-lantern, and one of the dots from the kit that says cute and creepy. And then my title is going to go all the way on the right that says Happy Halloween. I added some thick cardstock to the back because I knew that I was going to be popping up part of it, so I always like to reinforce any die cuts that I pop up on foam. And then I use some of my ATG adhesive and attach that down. I also attach down the witch's hat. And then, of course, I have to add some photo corners. So I have a scrap of paper that I had used to cut out my squares from earlier. And I used my EK Success corner punch, and I punched out some green corners. I thought that green would be a good color that would contrast with these very dark photos. And I inked the edges of all of those photo corners before I attach them down. Now I am putting some jewels on the photo corners. I decided to use some purple jewels. I thought that that would be a good color to go along with those green photo corners. And then this is where I decided that I was going to take off that witch's hat, and I'm going to relocate it to right near the title. Although I thought it looked cute at the top too. I like the way those purple jewels look. Something about jewels and this layout seem to go together really well, rather than pearls or using enamel dots. Just I think that the jewels just kind of go with the spirit of this layout. So I picked out jewels in a couple of different colors. I use orange, green, yellow, and purple jewels on the layout, and I add them to a couple of different spots. I add a number of them to the moon, to the witch's cauldron. I put quite a number going around the edge of the wreath that's serving as the title, and I also end up putting a jewel on the sentiment, cute and creepy. I don't usually think to put them on the dots, but I think that it worked in this case. I always buy jewels when I see them, especially if they're on a sale or they're a really good deal. It doesn't matter what color they are, because I know that eventually I end up using all of the colors, whether they're my favorite color or not. It just depends on whatever color scheme I'm working with. So I have a bit of a stash of jewels, and I really enjoyed adding them to this layout, especially the ones on the cauldron, because I think they look like different colored bubbles coming out. And I find that the jewels that I use the most often are the really small ones or the medium-sized ones. I don't use the very large ones too often, although I do use them every now and then, especially on my Christmas layouts. My daughter is a crafter too, and we had gone shopping in this place that sells Amazon returns, and we found this whole sheet of stickers, which ended up really being my daughter's. But she was telling me that I needed some of this particular color, the light green color, so she loaned that to me so I could add some of those to this layout, and she's very generous with her supplies. I've used that sheet of stickers or of jewels quite a few times to add them to my layouts. And there were quite a few of them, but adding the jewels was the very last touch that I added to this layout. And here are a few close-ups. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch this video. I really hope that you enjoyed watching. When you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, please be sure to use my name in the comments to receive a free gift. In the description box, I always put a link to the Shimmerz Paints website, so you could check out the Shimmerz shop. I also put a link to the particular kit that I use to create this layout, so that link is also available if you would like to use it. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.